This is going to be a bit of a different video today. Usually, this channel is about chess or math or programming or just gaming in general. I make games sometimes. Uh, that's what I do most of the time. But today, I am making this video largely because of a continuous conversation I keep having with someone who cares about me very much. My mother. So, let me preface this off by saying this video and the ideas inside of it are potentially painful. They aren't something that you necessarily want to listen to if you are not sound of mind or, frankly, have an open mind. So, assertion one, and I'll prove this to you over the course of the video. There are questions where the correct answer is I don't know. And having faith in those questions to any answer is counterproductive to your own existence. It is a bad thing. So here's question one. Do we exist? I'm going to prove we don't know by counterexample. Example one is the Matrix, the idea that we are living in a simulation for some reason, being run by something that we don't understand. It's a computer program, and inside of that, we just experience things as we're experiencing things. The world is a simulation, and then we get simulated senses: sight, touch, sound, hearing, smell. And then we have simulated experiences and a simulated consciousness, all of it, potentially. Or there could be breakdowns. In the Matrix, the consciousness was real, everything else was not. Equally, we could be in a real universe that behaves exactly the way we think it does, where matter is real stuff, and energy, and momentum, and all of that jazz. 3 spatial dimensions, 1 dimension of time, etc. Cause and effect. Alternatively, this is second counterexample. Let's use another easy one. Cthulhu mythos. The idea is that there is some being that we don't understand who is having a dream. And that dream is hyper detailed because of the nature of that being, and it's literally dreaming our universe into existence, and when it wakes up, we all die. Well, we don't really die, we were never alive, we just cease to exist. It doesn't make us living in this universe any less real for our sake, but it does mean that it is outside of our control, and at any point it could just end. Here's my last counterexample. Theory that, say, physics is not consistent. It changes randomly at random time intervals, and matter exists or doesn't exist moment to moment also randomly. In other words, a massive infinite span of different physicses, times, spaces, fucking matter arrangements, etc. And they randomly coalesce into a single moment that is just, for instance, you watching this video. Nothing else existed before, but you still have all your memories. It's just, it randomly happened. Like monkeys on the typewriter writing Shakespeare, but on a much, much larger scale. And then, at any point, possibly at the end of this video, it'll all just stop existing that way, because the random change will deviate. So we can't even prove the past is real, we can't prove we exist, we can't prove any of that. The correct answer to do we exist is I don't know. Now, that is heavy. That is already very heavy. But that also applies to things like the idea of an afterlife, to the idea of a god. There isn't a god, there is a god. Neither answer is correct. The correct answer is I don't know. And anyone who asserts such a thing, like for example, oh, I had a vision, motherfucker, you could have hallucinated that. I'm gonna tell you a story. So shortly after my first inpatient, in case you don't know, I've had mental health issues in the past. I tried to kill myself. Who would have thunk, right? After a conversation like this. I didn't fully have this figured out then, but one of my realizations that led there was in this moment, in this story I'm telling you. So shortly after that, I was at home and I had been put on a medication called Prozac. And it turns out the Prozac makes me manic. I don't normally get manic. I'm not a manic person. But that medication I had a really bad reaction to. And I was sitting there before I knew it was mania while I was figuring things out, meditating, because I often tell people I'm Buddhist. I don't believe in Buddhism, I just follow its teachings because it makes my life better and makes me a better person. I was sitting there meditating on the floor, and I thought I heard a voice, and a serenity washed through me, and it answered a few questions in very short order, and I was crying from the feeling. But I realized, and I laughed, a sad, sad laugh that made me weep even more, that I had no idea if I knew this was real, and I would never be able to know it was real. I could physically see the person speaking to me or the thing speaking to me standing in front of me and reaching out a hand, and it still wouldn't prove anything. That realization that I can't know is rough, because it means there's no value in faith. Any faith. Even including a faith that there is no God. I want to be clear. This is not an atheist viewpoint. Atheists say there is no God, and they use their own morals to standardize that. Motherfucker, morals are subjective. They can be built from scratch in any direction you choose once you have your standards. Personally, I think the worst thing you can do in your life is probably lying. And yes, I really do mean that is the worst thing you can do. Alright. So, we can't prove we exist. I physically heard what Christians would call the voice of God, and had my whole moment, and realized I could never really understand or believe it. But there is a shining light. As far as we can tell, the universe is consistent. Even in its randomness from the quantum realm, it is consistent in its inconsistency. In other words, we can calculate what is the most likely thing. And that consistency, that, as I'll say, lack of miracles, means that we can assume, with some amount of reasonable certainty, that we exist. Alright, so we've assumed we exist. Then we can assume, well, first we assume the universe exists, then we assume we exist, then we assume that most people are actually not philosophical zombies and are having the same thoughts and subjective experience as we are, and feeling the same types of things and having their own brain, and not just, an empty shell making noises. Alright, now that we've assumed those three things, and this whole worldview is built entirely on an acceptance of I don't know and making assumptions anyway. This is all is. There are no shoulds here. In other words, this doesn't say people don't matter. This doesn't say anything about right and wrong. Because, here, I'll put it this way. Just because what an ant does on Earth doesn't affect what happens on Jupiter, doesn't mean that ant acting in certain ways doesn't matter for him and his colony, or her and her colony. I think most ants are female. Or is that just bees? Oh well. Next part. People are fallible. Now, you can look at a person and have the utmost faith in their ability to pick up some slack and do what they need to do for the community and society and your friends and family. In other words, you can look your roommate in the eyes and try to figure out who they are, and as long as they don't prove you wrong, having some amount of trust in them tends to be a good thing. Now, there's all sorts of people that can refute that from their experiences trusting the wrong person, myself included. As the person who shouldn't have been trusted at the time, and the person who shouldn't have trusted someone else. I've fucked up a lot in my life. So far. I'm doing better. But as much faith as we can have in our fellow person, as much trust as we can try to have, love in our hearts for everyone else, ideas, especially when ideas are so free-flowing, you have to treat with the utmost skepticism. That includes any written word of accounts that you've never seen. You have to understand that you don't know how those things happened. Even if your government or your Bible tells you this is what happened and this is how things were, trusting that idea, that set of events, from merely eyewitness testimony or second, third, fourth hand, is not viable. This is part of why I think lying is such a bad thing, is because you're making understanding the world so much harder for everybody by being somebody who isn't a pillar of radical honesty. And frankly, it hurts generational learning, which is the one thing that humans have that actually makes us behave differently than, like, just a really smart ape. Somebody comes through and figures out how to make fire and write things down, and they tell their kids about it, and then those kids, in turn, figure out what woods burn the best, and what new words should be written as, and, like, work on the writing system, and so on. And it keeps building and building, stacking and stacking. But if you lie, or say things that you aren't certain of, and teach them to people, the generations will learn the lie, and it will become part of your culture. Because the most trust we ever have is in our parents. Until it's broken, of course. And luckily, I was not somebody where it was broken. But skepticism, doubt, in a reasonable manner, just ideas, not people, is not only necessary but beautiful. Now that's opinion. Alright, let's go back to just straight facts. Is I'm American, so I have to talk about Christianity for a sec. Is Christianity as a whole a good thing, despite it probably being built off of people just assuming the best? Like, game of telephone example, the whole water into wine thing easily could have been a literal interpretation of someone trying to prove a point, when it was a person who was there trying to say it was as if water turned to wine in his presence, as a metaphor for how it was to be around the man. And that game of telephone, that obfuscation of history, especially when it is spoken by people with religious zeal, is the moment you have to doubt it the most. The people who believe in something so strongly that they're unwilling to doubt and re-verify is the moment when they can lie unintentionally. They can be a victim of the generational lying. And if there is a God, in the sense that Christians understand, then I hope beyond hope that that God understands someone trying to be a good person and accepting that faith is impossible. This doesn't mean life is pointless. For that, the answer to that question, turn to logotherapy. This doesn't mean that helping other people isn't a good thing. Christianity and Buddhism have so many very well articulated, well done, evidential examples. I don't think evidential is a word. Well evidenced examples. That might not be the right way to say it, but stories and proofs and reasons why love thy neighbor, fucking thou shalt not kill, all of that is a good thing. And the culture of people coalescing in one spot once a week to talk about how the world is, in theory, amazing. The problem with that, I would assert, is the preacher, the person trying to tell people how the world is. It would be better if pastors, preachers, priests, all they did was provide a podium and take care of the house that is the church. Because then, if that was how it was, doubt would be acceptable. But the problem is, there is a bias in these conversations, including from my mother. They have it with the idea that they have to have it to try to save you. That if they can just convince you, they can save you from burning in eternal torment. And Theremin Trees has some words to say on that one. So, regardless of how well articulated and well thought your argument is against knowing, their goal is to save you, so they won't listen. At least so far.